what we have is a beginning of a new era, and we will unleash, with our Ministry of Darkness, a plague for which the World Wrestling Federation has never seen before. And with those chilling words, the Ministry of Darkness was officially born. Hello, everyone. This is Warhawk Beyond 2040, bringing to you another edition of the Wrestling Discussion Series. And October 19th, 1998 marks 26 years ago that the Ministry of Darkness was officially formed. And for today's special edition, I am going to be talking about the success and failures of the Ministry of Darkness from October 1998 to April 1999. So, after 2 years of feuding and at each other's throats, The Undertaker and Paul Bearer reunited at the In Your House Judgment Day 1998 pay per view when Paul Bearer interfered in the vacant WWF Championship match between The Undertaker and Kane when Paul Bearer struck his own son Kane with a steel chair, followed up by another steel chair attack by The Undertaker, and this led to the official reunion between The Undertaker and Paul Bearer. So the big question that everyone wanted answered was, why are The Undertaker and Paul Bearer back together? Why has The Undertaker gone back to his former manager after all the times that they were at each other's throats? We wouldn't have to wait long for that question to be answered, as the next night on the October 19th, 1998 edition of Raw, The Undertaker and Paul Bearer would come out together for the first time in 2 years since 1996 in the summer of August. Although Undertaker and Paul Bearer were together in 1997, that was through blackmail and against Undertaker's will, but this moment officially marked the first time that The Undertaker and Paul Bearer were back together on the dark side. And Undertaker would get on the mic and pretty much explain himself as to why he was back with Paul Bearer. And he pretty much said that Paul Bearer allowed him to clear his head and refocus on why he was here. And he would also go on to say that Kane was weak then and he is weak now. And Paul Bearer would follow that up by saying that he would have no further use for his son Kane, and that he was weak and stupid, and that he would never truly understand the darkness. And then Undertaker would officially turn heel by admitting that he was the one who set fire to Kane, resulting in Kane being disfigured and being forced to wear a mask. So The Undertaker and Paul Bearer officially had formed the Ministry of Darkness and were now heels on the dark side. Now, throughout the rest of 1998, Undertaker would continue to feud with Stone Cold while still referencing the Ministry of Darkness. And around this time, we would see Farouk and Bradshaw form a tag team called the Acolytes, with the Jackal managing them, but that wouldn't last long, as the Jackal would leave WWF shortly after Farouk and Bradshaw got together. The Acolytes would be the first to join the Ministry of Darkness, although we wouldn't actually see the Acolytes and The Undertaker together on TV until January 99. But the Acolytes would make references to a mystery leader. They would refer to this mystery leader as he or him, and they would go after Dennis Knight and attack him, and we would see the Acolytes deliver multiple beatdowns to Dennis Knight, even going as far as attacking him in the parking lot and abducting him and driving away in a car. And we wouldn't really learn who this mystery leader was until January 99, when The Undertaker returned for the first time since being buried alive back in December by Stone Cold and Kane, and The Undertaker returned in a brand new look with a long devilish goatee and a dark hooded robe. And this was when the Ministry of Darkness really started to take shape. So we had The Undertaker, Paul Bearer, and the Acolytes, who were kind of like the foundation for the faction. And Dennis Knight would be brainwashed and converted into Midian, who was kind of like this creepy eye of the ministry for The Undertaker. But The Undertaker wouldn't stop there. At the Royal Rumble 99, he would attack Mabel and brainwash him, and we would see him become Viscera on the next night on Raw. And the Ministry of Darkness was continuing to get more darker and more evil with every week. And then we would see the Brood, Edge, Christian, and Gangrel join the ministry as some form of initiation when the Acolytes, Viscera, and Midian would attack the Brood and go as far as to hang Gangrel with a noose. Later on in the show, we would see the Brood were unveiled as the newest members of the Ministry of Darkness, and the Ministry of Darkness was officially completed as a faction. So we had The Undertaker as the evil, demonic, cult like leader, Paul Bearer as the manager, the Acolytes as Hell's henchmen delivering the beatdowns, Viscera as the muscle, Midian as the eye, and the Brood as the Gothic trio. Now, what I loved about the Ministry of Darkness was everyone had their gimmick and played it up to perfection. The Brood, with their Gothic vampire gimmick, was such a perfect fit for Undertaker's satanic persona. Everything about the ministry was just perfection. There was no weak links. Everyone had their role and just did an amazing job with it. But for me, when I think of the Ministry of Darkness, I think of Undertaker, Paul Bearer, and the Acolytes. That's the ministry right there. No disrespect to the Brood, Viscera, and Midian. They were great, but those guys, that was the ministry. That's what you had. Those are the guys that formed and built the whole group from scratch. They were the guys. And I would say, as far as in ring performances, as far as talents, obviously Undertaker being the legend that he is, but aside from Taker, I would say that the Brood, they were definitely the most talented of the whole ministry, barring Taker, of course. They could really go very quick, very athletic, and unbelievable wrestlers in the ring. So, after the Ministry of Darkness was formed, Undertaker would declare that he was going to take over the WWF and that Vince McMahon's soul belonged to him. So, this would kick off a feud between the Ministry and the corporation. Now, what made this very interesting was the Ministry and the corporation were essentially both heel factions. But the Ministry, although they were heels, got cheered, mostly because of The Undertaker. The corporation were 100% heels because, well, look who's in charge, Vince McMahon. So we would see the Ministry go after several members of the corporation, specifically Ken Shamrock and Big Boss Man, and this would lead to a match between Bossman and Midian at St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Midian would lose the match, but the Ministry would beat down Bossman and kidnap him, and this eventually led to a match at WrestleMania 15 against The Undertaker. And I love The Undertaker, but that Hell in a Cell match was absolutely terrible. It only went 9 minutes, but it was really bad. The only highlights of the whole match was Undertaker's entrance when he came out in this great big humongous spiked cape looking like Lord Hades or Satan. I thought that was a really cool entrance. But aside from that, yeah, that match was terrible. And of course, Bossman got hanged after the match, which was very controversial, very dark. And as far as feuds, apart from the corporation, the ministry as a faction didn't really have much memorable feuds. And that's not a knock on the ministry. That was how it was. They just didn't really feud with anybody else. It was just mainly the corporation. Specifically, it was between The Undertaker and Vince McMahon. And obviously, Undertaker would cross paths with Kane once again, and they'll go head to head in a second Inferno match with Undertaker obviously coming out on top. And he would go as far as setting the teddy bear on fire, bringing Vince McMahon to his knees. But as a faction, the ministry was sadly short lived, but very dark and really got your attention. When the lights went out, you knew the ministry was coming out, and they were certainly a very unique faction. There had never been anyone quite like them. And as I said earlier, everyone had their gimmick and played it to perfection. Undertaker really reached his peak as a character, and he was as dark as he could be. Undertaker was really at his peak, I would say, as a character. Maybe not in the ring so much because he was kind of banged up, so we didn't really see Undertaker wrestle that much during the early days of the Ministry of Darkness. He would still wrestle matches, but he would wrestle very sparingly. The Ministry would do a lot of the work for him. And what I also liked about the Ministry was no one was really there to challenge Taker. There wasn't anyone in that group you could say, you know what, I could see him defeating Taker. Everyone knew their place. Everyone knew who the man was. Everyone knew who the legend was. And it was good. It was really, really good. So as we move forward to April 99, we would see the Brood sadly leave the ministry after weeks of Christian constantly being singled out by The Undertaker, whipped, and the Brood getting beat down. But the final straw would be was when Undertaker wanted Christian sacrificed to his symbol and asked the Brood to be the ones to do it. And once Edge and Gangrel declared that they weren't going to do that, this led to a mini civil war between the Ministry and the Brood. Now, with the Brood, they were already over before they joined the Ministry, but I felt that when the Brood were added to the Ministry, as I said earlier, their gothic vampire gimmick was so perfect. You just couldn't timed it any better. It was just done so well. You know, Gangrel with the blood and the fangs, Edge with the long leather trench coat and sometimes had red paint on his face, grinning away. And you had Christian just standing there with the shades, just looking super serious. The Brood was so perfect for the ministry. But I think I read somewhere that the reason why the Brood were dropped from the ministry was because I think the ministry were trying to get a lot of heat as heels, but they were just getting constantly cheered. And a lot of that was because of the Brood. I mean, obviously, fans absolutely adore The Undertaker, which goes without saying. But the Brood, they were definitely over. But I was a bit bummed out because I felt that once the Brood were gone, the Ministry kind of lost that little bit of dark mystique that they had. I mean, they were still a great faction, don't get me wrong, but I kind of felt that they lost their dark edge just a little bit once the Brood left. I just think maybe that was a bit of a bad blow. But obviously, WWF had big plans for Edge and Christian, which we all know that Edge and Christian would later go on to become one of the most celebrated and iconic tag teams of all time, going as far as to win the tag team titles on 7 occasions. So that's pretty impressive. So you could say that although losing them in the ministry was bad, look what they went on to do after. So Around this time, The Undertaker would specifically start to target Stephanie McMahon, and this obviously led to Stephanie getting kidnapped at the end of Backlash 99 with the infamous "Where to, Stephanie?" And this would lead to the Dark Wedding the next night, and Stone Cold came out and basically saved Stephanie and took out the whole ministry. This is where things start to lose a few points with me. I liked it when the ministry were feuding with the corporation, but then as the Stephanie thing became more of the focus, it just became all about the McMahons, which sadly would lead to the demise of the ministry, because as we all know, the ministry's run was short lived, as I said earlier, as we would see the ministry join up with the corporation to become the corporate ministry, which I will talk about in another edition. In terms of the success of the Ministry of Darkness, I would say overall they were very successful and they made a big impact during their short lived run together. As I said, they didn't really have much memorable feuds. It was mostly against the corporation, which was very enjoyable. As I said earlier, everyone had their gimmick and played it up to pure perfection. There were some memorable promos, some great segments came out of this run. Everybody was at their peak, especially The Undertaker. And in terms of the failures of the Ministry of Darkness, the two failures that I would say were the Ministry didn't last long enough, and the second failure was obviously the Ministry merging with the corporation, which, as I said earlier, we are going to definitely be talking about that. But I enjoyed the Ministry of Darkness. I thought they were a great faction from the Attitude Era, and it did help elevate quite a few of the guys. As I said, Edge and Christian will go on to become 7-time tag team champions. The Acolytes would later become the APA and go on to have quite a few tag team title runs, and they would become very popular. Gangrel would pretty much flounder in the mid card scene before eventually being released. Midian, he would go on to have a very bad gimmick called Naked Midian, and thankfully that did not last too long. He would get released shortly after. And Viscera, he would pretty much come in and out of the company. He would return in 2004 alongside Gangrel and help deliver a beatdown to The Undertaker, led by Bradshaw, who was now JBL as the WWE champion. And we would also see Undertaker and Paul Bearer reunite once again in 2004. But as far as references to the ministry, we'll get a few in 2004, but that would pretty much be it. The ministry would never really be spoken of again. We wouldn't really see any ministry reunions with The Undertaker, which is a shame, really. But I think what made the Ministry of Darkness so special was, aside from the fact that it didn't last long, they made a big impact and they weren't as big as DX. Not many factions are, but they were big in their own way and they have a nice little legacy. And, a lot of fans look back at the faction and say, you know what, that faction was pretty cool. I just wish they lasted a bit longer. But, sometimes the good things don't always last long, but what we did get out of it was pretty damn good, in my opinion. I thought the Ministry were so cool and definitely one of my favourite factions of all time. But overall, very successful. I just wished that they lasted just a bit longer, at least up until 2000, if Undertaker had stuck around and wasn't banged up and injured. But it is what it is. But great faction, very successful. Couple of failures, but not failures down to them. The whole McMahon drama kind of made the ministry take a backseat a little bit, but the ministry was still great. You can't deny that they were a cool faction. And when you look at it as a faction with members in the team, The ministry only lasted a total of 4 months, from January 99 to April 99. It's not really long when you think about it. When you look at groups like DX and the NWO, which lasted years, it's quite shocking, you know, that a cool faction like the Ministry had such a very short run. Yes, Undertaker did announce the formation of the Ministry back in '98, but you didn't really see anyone joining them officially till beginning of '99, as far as like on TV together. But, it's such a shame, that the Ministry of Darkness only had, as a group, a 4 month run. A real shame. I definitely would have loved to have seen him last much longer than that. At least maybe a 6 or 8 month run, or a year at least. But obviously, Undertaker was injured, and of course, we know that the ministry merged with the corporation, so that kind of hurt things as well. But it's just mind blowing when you look at it that they had such a short run, but in that short time, they definitely made a big impact. And yeah, I just really wish that they got a longer run as a faction, but it is what it is. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on the Ministry of Darkness? Did you enjoy it? Do you think the Ministry was a success, or do you think the Ministry was a failure? What was your favourite moment from the Ministry's run? Was it when Undertaker announced the formation of the Ministry, or when he recruited Dennis Knight and converted him into Midian, or when he recruited Mabel and converted him into Viscera? What was your thoughts on the Brood joining the Ministry? Do you think they were a great fit? Would you have liked to have seen the Ministry last a little bit longer, perhaps? What was your thoughts on the Ministry feuding against the corporation? Would you have liked to have seen that feud maybe go on a little bit longer, perhaps? And do you think Kane should have been in the Ministry? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Wrestling Discussion Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.